Yo, what's happening, Cucumber Squad, and welcome back to the Fable Sphere. Before we even get started, as you know, the link to my website is down in the pinned comment. Click on that, go to my website and join the Sphere. It's completely free, it costs you absolutely nothing. You can join the groups over there, you can interact with me, you can request a whole bunch of different reactions, different content, whatever it is that you want. It's great. All the cucumbers are there. Well, the people who have joined are there. And yeah, I'd like to get everybody there. I'm no longer on social media at all. All my social medias have been stopped. I've literally deleted everything, all my accounts. I am only on YouTube and on my website. My website's consistently evolving, it's getting bigger, it's going to become very modular, it's going to offer a lot of things to YouTubers, a lot of things to artists, a lot of things to my cucumbers and my fan base. It's really cool. We keep building, and eventually we'll have a nice little family on the website. Now, for something completely different, man, that it's come through the request form on my website, is this called The Truth, one of the greatest speeches ever by Jordan Peterson. Now, just before we even get started with this, I absolutely adore Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson's one of my role models. Jordan Peterson is one of my biggest inspirations in life. I've read a lot of his stuff. I've watched almost all of his university lectures, and I just absolutely adore the man. I think he's one person that a lot of people, specifically on the far left, have vilified. Well, not vilified, they've made a villain out of him. And I do not understand why, but that's that. I think I love the man. As you can see, I've got his 12 Rules for Life, which I've read, which is absolutely incredible. I have not heard this one. A lot of the smaller snippets I haven't heard, essentially, so that's why I thought, well, this is different content, this is something different. So I thought, let's listen to this. Man, there's close to nothing that this man says that I disagree with. There are certain things I disagree with Jordan Peterson on, but the vast majority of his work is just so inspiring. So yeah, man, let's just see the truth, right? Obviously, it would be a Jordan Peterson thing. One of the greatest speeches ever, man. Let's see what we got. Let's go.
In order to find your way through all of that, you need to develop a relationship with something that's profound. And you have that capacity. And what could be more profound than the truth? And what would you rather have on your side? And to do more than your best, because your best isn't enough, because your best isn't as good as you could be. You have to push yourself past that. And that's, as far as I can tell, where you find what you need in life. You find the meaning that sustains you in life, and you find the patterns of action that redeem the world. Nietzsche said that...
Friedrich Nietzsche, okay, we're going to go into that statement, but over there where he actually says there, where, you know, he says where you'll find your happiness and where, you know, the actions that can redeem the world is in the truth. Now that's an unbelievable thing. It's an unbelievable statement to make, because it's 100% true. If I actually look at my 20s, you know, from when I was 20 to 30, and the strifes that I went through in my life at that time, it all came from a place where I blamed everybody else for my life. I blamed everybody else for my situation. I take it all the way. I take it far back. I was living so badly in the past. I was looking so badly in my childhood, and how much I hated my childhood, and how toxic my childhood was, and how abusive my father was, and how terrible my life was at the time, that I actually wore that as baggage, and I used my past as a hitching post as opposed to, you know, a guidepost. And what actually happened is I started creating this narrative in my head that everything that happens in my life, right, is part and parcel of everybody else's injustices towards me, as opposed to me thinking like I had the power to change all of that. You know what I mean? I could have changed all of that. Nobody held a gun to my head. I could have changed every aspect of my life. But because I was lying to myself, because I was telling myself that it's everybody else's fault, because I never took responsibility, I never took accountability for anything I did, I was consistently unhappy. And the thing is, it comes together with your baser urges. Like, in my 20s, because of my childhood, I just wanted to do whatever I wanted to do. And a lot of what I wanted to do were really bad decisions. So I just went without thinking and I just did those bad decisions. And then when I got the consequences of those bad decisions, I would lie to myself and say that it's the reason this is happening to me is not because of me, it's because of my past, it's because of my mother, it's because of my father, it's because of everybody else. I was always looking, I was always pointing the finger at everybody else instead of actually putting a mirror in front of me and introspecting for a second and saying, wait a second, are you telling yourself the truth? Are you looking at yourself and saying, everything that I see in this mirror, I am content with? Right? It was such a hard road to go through to actually tell myself, it was such a hard road to go through to actually tell myself that all of it was me. I was the problem. It's so hard to look at you because you're in such denial and your ego gets in the way that all you tend to think is it's everybody else's fault. When I eventually broke through that, the world completely opened for me. And happiness was just a side effect from my responsibility and awareness. The moment I started being responsible, happiness just came. It was like a side effect. It was just like, because I'm not giving in to all these baser urges and just jumping into the impulsive decadences of life and actually operating like an orderly human being, happiness just all of a sudden was there. It wasn't something I had to seek. It was something that was just there because I was able to control myself, right? So on the truth thing, it's such a big point for me because of the fact that for a large part of my life, I was lying to myself all the time. And to an extent, to this very day, I still feel that in certain situations I lie to myself. But at least I've got the mechanics. At least I've got the mechanics that I actually know when I'm lying to myself now. You know what I mean? Like I'll get angry and in the spur of the moment, I'll say like, yo, damn it, this always happens to me. And then like I calm down for 10 minutes and it's like, yeah, it happens to you because you're an idiot. It happens to you because this is your fault. You did this. It's no one else's fault. Right? I'm more able to take that criticism on who I am. But my God, that was a long journey to go through. And it was a lot of pain that I had to go through to realize that there was nobody else to blame. It was just me.
The world. Nietzsche said that you could tell
Nietzsche is amazing.
Much about a man's character by how much truth he could tolerate. Which is very interesting. Yep. You know, there's an idea in the great Western tradition that the truth is the way and the path of life, and that no one comes to the Father except through the truth. And I believe that to be the case because I don't think that you can manifest who you are without the truth. And so I think it's literally and metaphorically truth, that the pathway to who you could be if you were completely who you were.
This always gets to me because not only is it something that's at least, you know, when I hear something like this, it allows me to reflect back and there's a lot of relatability in the words that he says. But I always say that you will never know who you are. I don't think a human being ever knows who they are because for me, I kind of feel that I never knew who I was. I don't know who I am. I just know who I can be as I move on. And that's very much driven by environments. It's very much driven by certain situations. You don't know how you're going to be in certain situations in your normal life today, which is unbelievably privileged. The whole world today, the majority of the democratic Western world are unbelievably privileged, right? And we've gotten it easy, and we're standing on the shoulders of men of real strong, brave men and women who fought for all of this for us. They fought for all of this. They fought for us to have the freedoms that we have today. They fought so that we didn't have to fight today. And we are ignorantly and pathetically, stupidly reversing all of that because we got too weak. We've got no more character. You know, I once read, and I can't remember where I read this, but I once read before, I think it might have been in Man's Search for Meaning, Dr. Viktor Frankl, was a book about the Holocaust. Incredible book, I suggest you read it, right? And I'm not entirely sure if it was that book or someone else. I stand corrected. I also read a lot of my wife's psychology books. I'm not a psychologist. My wife is a psychologist, but I love to read her books because I just find it so fascinating. The human psyche is just so fascinating. But it once actually said, in one of those books, it said, if you lose your wealth, you've lost nothing. If you lose your health, you've lost something. But if you lose your character, you've lost everything. Because then there's no hope for you. Absolutely no hope. And that also, I'm not entirely sure if it's the same book, but it ties into Dr. Viktor Frankl's book where I know for certain this is what he said. He said when they took away all of his possessions, when he was in Auschwitz, when he's been split from his family, he doesn't know where his wife and children are, nothing. And they took away everything. I mean, he had a doctorate. The guy he had like everything in life, everything. And they took his doctorate and they threw it in fire. They took everything he owned and they threw it in the fire. And one of the SS guards literally told him, now you have nothing. And he turned to them and he pointed to his head and his heart and he said, I never have nothing. Right? It's such a powerful thing because that's character. And it's character that so much of the youth today are missing. Because we've allowed them to give into their decadences. We've allowed them to give into their impulses. We've allowed for ideologies that that allow youngsters to sit there and say, I can be whatever I want to be, whoever I want to be. I can literally drop identity, whether it be soul or physical. I can drop absolutely everything, give into my baser urges fully. I've been there. I've done that. And it's landed me in nothing but pain. Nothing but pain. All it did was just hurt me. It tore relationships apart. It tore relationships with my friends apart. And everything. We're here on this earth. And we're here on this earth to be orderly. There's a certain order to nature. There's a certain order to humanity. And if we don't realize and focus on what our role is here, what we have a specific, particular role, a predefined role, right here. And if we don't stay true to what that role is, we completely set astray. And we think that if you set astray and be like, I'm just going to be and do and say whatever I want, and everybody needs to, I not only need to be the center of my universe, I need to be the center of everybody else's universe, because only then am I happy. But you're not. Whenever you purport to an ideology of being the center of somebody else's ideology, where the perception of yourself needs to be adulated by somebody else, or needs to be validated by somebody else at every turn, you're not happy with yourself. You're intrinsically not happy. That's the whole point. And that's what we have in today's world. Today's world is, in order for me to be happy with myself, in order for me to validate who I am, I need you to validate it. And I need everyone around me to validate. And all that's happening is you're becoming a bore to everybody else, and people would rather not be around you. People don't want to be told what they need to do, or to be around you for you to be happy. If you're not happy with yourself, nothing is going to make you happy. Absolutely nothing. Nothing people say, nothing you say, nothing. You will be offended by something all of the time. Rather build yourself to be anti-fragile than to be fragile. Put on those boots and trudge through the jungle. Life is fucking hard. Learn to deal with it.
Is through the truth. And so the truth does set you free, but the problem is that it destroys everything that isn't worthy in you as it sets you free, and that's a process of burning. And it's painful because you cling to what you shouldn't be, partly out of pride and partly out of ignorance and partly out of laziness. And,
I just said that.
And so then you encounter something true, and you all know this perfectly well, because when was the last time that you learned something important that wasn't a blow of some sort, you know? And it's often you look back at your life and you think, oh God, I really learned something there. I wouldn't want to do that again, but it really changed my life. I mean, sometimes it can really destroy you, you know, an encounter with the truth, and you never really recover. But now and then something comes along and straightens you out, and a lot of you has to go. A lot of you has to burn away.
It's a beautiful way of putting it though, man. So much better than what I said, obviously. But it is that. Learning who you really are is a process of burning. And it's far more painful of a process today because of how much of a fake world we live in. In my day, where I went through all of that between my 20s and 30s, the online world wasn't so pertinent. I wasn't so sort of engrossed in the online world. Not like the the young generation today. The young generation are literally plugged into that. But the one thing why that process of burning is so much more painful today, if you're able to, if you're able to get out of it, is because you realize that every single thing around you, the entire world, your entire worldview, by how it's dictated today by the media, by Hollywood, by the elites, by the schooling system, by the governments, are all completely and utterly fake. Everything is fake. We live in a completely fake world that is completely void of truth. And the man who says the truth is the one that's being shunned because it offends the other people's feelings. The truth cannot be told because we need to protect feelings. And that is so dangerous because, like I say, everything in this world is fake. Everything you see around you is fake. Your influencers are fake. Your social media is fake. Your news agencies are fake. Your governments are fake. Your money is fake. Your stock markets are fake. Your movements today, your activism is fake. Everything around you is based on virtue signaling. Everything around you is based on pandering to different pigeonholes, is placing people in different pigeonholes. It's almost cultish to a certain degree that we cannot actually, if we follow somebody, that we can't even look at the people that we follow. We can't even look at the people that we follow and scrutinize them. How dare anybody scrutinize the opposing side where you're not able to scrutinize the very people in your own camp? How can you not keep your own house in order but be pointing fingers outward? Leaders are followed by leaders. Leaders have leaders as followers, not followers. Any leader who wants a follower, who wants a following that just follows them blindly, are not leaders. A true leader would rather have people around him that is going to point out and criticize him and say this is wrong, because that makes him a powerful leader. Leaders are surrounded by leaders, and any leader that's surrounded by followers is not a true leader. It's fake. It's not a leader. They've got an agenda over there to try and control a certain narrative, to try and control a certain ideology, to grasp more power or influence. Any true leader is willing to take criticism from the people around him. And in order to take criticism from the people around him, he can't surround himself with yes men. He needs to surround himself with other leaders. And we don't have that anymore. We don't have that in the world today. Because what the internet has done is it's opened up the world to the village idiot. Before, the village idiot would stay in the village. And the people with the real intellect, the people who were knowledgeable, the people who worked to acquire their knowledge and to pass it on, were the ones that were pushed to the forefront. Now they're not. Now we're pushing the village idiot to the forefront because social media opened up the world to the village idiot. And now we've gone to a point where the village idiot's feelings are far more important than truth and reality and responsibility and accountability and knowledge by people like this, by people like Jordan Peterson.
You know, and I suppose in some sense the idea is that everything about you that isn't worthy is to be put into the flames. And that's another reason to be not so casual about claiming what you believe, because it isn't something that you undertake without due caution. You know, I learned when I was a kid, about 25 or so, a little older than a kid, that almost everything that I said was one form of lie or another.
You heard what I said in the beginning.
And I wasn't any worse, I would say, than the people that I was associating with, or any better. And the lies were manifold. You know, they were attempts to win arguments for the sake of winning the argument. That might be one. Attempts to indicate my intellectual prowess when there were competitions of that sort. Maybe just the...
On that point, sorry, I apologize for pausing, but just on that point, I've encountered a lot of really, really intellectual, brilliant people in my life, personally in my own life. People that were outside of my family, that actually really like me, like they like my kid to this very day. They've been, you know, role models to me. And one of the things that was said to me specifically by my brother-in-law, when I was going through a hard time and having, you know, all of these issues in my life, it was actually quite a hard thing, because, you know, it came from we'd have arguments, and it came from a place of arrogance where I would debate him on my own life, and it was like, this guy is such a successful man and I was not, but yet I was looking at him and bringing him and trying to bring him down. Ideologically, I was trying to bring him down to my level, right? And he would never go down there. He'd never go down there because that's just not where he operated from. But that's a loser's mentality. A loser mentality is one who looks up and tries to bring somebody else down to their level, as opposed to looking where you are and saying, I'm going to rise to his level. And a lot of the times I'd engage in these arguments with him, and because I had a little bit of knowledge, or I had read things, or I had seen things here and there, I'd arrogantly put my points out, and you know, he would calmly say, he says, you know what, Phil, a little bit of knowledge can be dangerous. You know, because from an egotistical perspective, you think you know everything, but you don't. This man has lived longer than me. This man has been on this earth longer than me. This man, I mean, he's about 20 years older than me. He's been around longer. He's experienced a lot more. He's seen a lot more. He's become wise to so many things. He's trudged those roads and he's made those mistakes. But I was the one who was arrogant enough to think that I was smarter than the man who's actually knowledgeable about life, because he's just been here longer. He's felt the pain. He's felt the burning. And for him, it was one of the most painful things I ever heard was, you know, I won't, if you carry on down this road, you can destroy your life all you want, but I it's not going to change how I sleep at night. I'll sleep fine. My life is fine. Do you sleep well at night? Are you happy? Do you look in the mirror and say that I am happy with what I see? Look at where you are and look at where I am. If we never talk again, that changes nothing for me. But it would change a lot for you. And he put the phone down on me. It was hard for me to swallow that. Specifically where I was, it was hard for me to swallow that. But it was the truth.
The sheer pleasure of engaging in an intellectual argument and winning, my inability to distinguish between ideas that I had read and incorporated because I had read but hadn't realized that I hadn't yet earned the right to use, all of that. And, you know, I had this experience that lasted a long time. Well, I would say it's really never gone away. And I think this was the awakening of my conscience, essentially. This voice, for lack of a better word, made itself manifest inside me, and it said every time I said something that wasn't true, and that's usually what it said. That's not true. You don't believe that. Or there was a sensation that was associated with it. I don't think this is that uncommon, you know.
I think there's definitely a sensation associated with it, 100% with what he's saying over there. But I think when you're in that state of denial, there is a sensation where you feel that this is wrong. But I think that also comes with a flood of justification, specifically when you're in that space. You know, when you're operating from, I call it the it, when you're operating from that sort of like it statement. It's like this thing, it sits here. It sits here in your head and sits here in your heart. You know what I mean? When you're sitting under that dark shadow, you know, amongst the mushrooms, right? That you know it's wrong. But when you're in that space, you justify it all. And why you justify it all? Because of the baggage that you carry from the past. You justify it. It's right. It's okay for me to do this because I've had such a hard life. It's okay for me to do this because my childhood was a fucking joke. It's okay for me to do this because my dad tried to commit a couple of times in front of me. It's okay for me. It's not okay. It comes with justification. And that's why you do that. And it's a lot of work to get out of that.
Or there was a sensation that was associated with it. I don't think this is that uncommon, you know. I asked my psychology classes for many years in a row if they had an experience, that they had a voice in their head, let's say, it's a metaphor, or a feeling that communicated to them when they were about to do something wrong. And it was universally the case that people agreed with one of those statements or another. And the other thing I would ask is, well, do you always listen to it? And of course the answer to that was definitely no. Well, you know, I learned that so much of what I was doing was false. And I think I learned this. See, there was a reason that this came to me so clearly. I was trying to understand why people did terrible things. And I was really concentrating on the terrible, terrible things that people do. And I was interested in Auschwitz, for example, and not as a political phenomenon, but as a psychological phenomenon. I was curious about how you could be an Auschwitz guard. And I wasn't really curious about how you could be one, because, well, you could be one, that. Of course. I was more curious about how I could be one, being such a good person as I thought I was. But
it's actually crazy that he's saying this because my wife actually showed me something. I think it was called the Stanford guard experiment, or Stanford prison experiment. There was actually an experiment that was conducted where they took normal people, normal average day people from all different walks of life, from all different EQ and IQ levels, sitting on different spectrums essentially, and they said, okay, well, we're going to put these people, put them in uniform, right? And these were people that like they were friends with each other and things like that, and put them in uniform. And a set of crowd was going to play as prisoners, and one set of people were going to play as the guards, right? And we're going to play the authority figures. And when they did that, as it went on, you know, it was kind of like everybody knew that this was just an experiment. Like nothing was real over here, right? But they had to follow certain sets of rules and things like that. But as the experiment went on, now I'm saying it loosely. It's just from what I remember, from what I've been told, and from what my wife showed me. As it went on, these people who knew each other, these people who had become friends with each other, as time passed in the prison, right? They took their authority figures so hectically, like it almost became like they became these evil people, right? And these were good people. These were people that you would think, like you and I, would never do something like this, right? And they started turning on their own friends. They started turning on people that they knew were part of the experiment, and they were starting to brutalize them to the point that they had to end the experiment, because normal people, where it was just an experiment, this was not real life, had turned and become evil, had psychologically flipped. I think any human being has got the ability to either be a Hitler or to be a Nelson Mandela, to either be a Stalin or a Mother Teresa. I think we've actually got, every single human being has got that in their heart. And I think, you know, it's complex. It's based on a lot of things. It's based on your upbringing. It's based on your environment. It's based on your stripes. It's based on many different elements. But we'd be foolish to think that even ourselves as intellectuals right now, if we had to be put into those sort of situations, like in World War II, as a god, would you be able to act differently? Because the majority of society don't usually stand up when they see atrocities like that. They just go with it. And eventually they sort of believe that lie. They believe that lie of, you know, gassing people is a good thing because it's for the greater good of humanity. They start believing that lie. The more the lie is told to them, the more they start to believe that lie, that it actually is for something greater. And that's why it's so dangerous to not tell yourself the truth. It's so dangerous to be oblivious to who you actually are and who you can become. And this is why I say, like I said in the beginning, you will never, ever, ever know who you are. That'll change so many times in your life. It's changed so many times in mine. I always thought I was a certain person, but if you had to put me in different environments, somehow I'm different. And somehow things change. And I can't even fathom to think how I would be in an environment like World War II. I'd like to think that I'd be the man that's courageous enough to stand up and to show what humanity's really made of. But I'm not entirely sure that fear wouldn't encompass me completely. And I don't think anybody on this earth is entirely sure that they would be able to stand up in a situation like that. And you'll only find that out when you're in that situation.
I could be one, being such a good person as I thought I was. But I also knew that many people did many terrible things during the 20th century, and the idea that I was somehow better than them, or that I should assume a priori that I was better than them, and that I wouldn't have made the same choices or worse had I been in the same situation, was a very, very, very dangerous supposition. And that we really 100%. Needed to understand why it happened, and that perhaps we could go deep enough in that understanding, which is, I think, what happens when you go deep into understanding, so that you could stop it. Because if you understand the problem, maybe you can solve it. You know, and at least in part, I came to believe that the problem was, as Solzhenitsyn said, that the problem is that the line between good and evil runs down every human heart. And I was reading Jung at the same time, you know, and he believed that the human soul was a tree whose roots grew all the way to hell, and believed...
Jesus, that's a beautiful way of putting it. The human soul is what? I haven't heard those two names, Solzhenitsyn and Jung.
Down every human heart. And I was reading Jung at the same time, you know, and he believed that the human soul was a tree whose roots grew all the way to hell.
Wow.
And believed also that in the full investigation of the shadow, which was the dark side of the human psyche, was that it was bottomless, essentially, that it was like an experience of hell. And that also struck me as true. And that the way to stop those sorts of things from happening was to stop yourself from being the sort of person who would do it, who would even start to do it. Because the other thing you learn when you learn about atrocities of that sort, for me it was a matter of understanding that the way to stop such things from happening, the way to remember properly, is to understand that you could do it, that you could do those terrible things.
All capable of it, all
because
of us.
The people who did them were like you. And that the way...
That's what is so mind-blowing about society today. The virtue signaling, where I am greater than everybody else, and we'd go back centuries, and we'd go back years. And if I was in that situation, I would never be like that. As a white person in the slavery days, you know what I mean? I'd stand up against this. No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't, and the majority of people wouldn't either, right? It was a system that was running at full steam. That there were levels of fear involved in it. There were levels of consequences that if you ever stood up against something like that you were thrown into, dire consequences. So this idea that we have a young generation that is playing this reverse Nostradamus to say that we are more virtuous because, yeah, we all know now society has progressed. We all know now that slavery is wrong. We all know now that there were massive atrocities back in the day, but that was the way of the world back then. That was the way of the world back then. We couldn't change that. That was how it was. To judge a society today by yesterday's standards is just so ignorantly pathetic. Judge today by today's standards. And this is the thing of not being able to tell the truth. The very same people who are virtue signaling, the very same people who are using injustices from 100 years ago to put themselves on a pedestal or on the ivory tower as a good person today, when that has all been erased, when I say I'm talking about the atrocities are no longer there. We've gone through it. We've progressed through it. Correcting and correcting ever more. To go and put there and say that I'm better than you because I stand with black people. I'm not racist. But that white guy is racist because he has a certain position, or he has a certain he's not being racist at all, but just because he doesn't share an ideology, he doesn't share the position, we point the finger and say, oh no, he's racist. I knew slavery was wrong. Everybody today knows that slavery is wrong. Every single person today, aside from a few. But if you had to go and chop up the world and take any cross-section of any part of the world, you're going to find all sorts in the world. Yes, you're going to find the racists. Yes, you're going to find the murderers. Yes, you're going to find the psychopaths. Yes, you're going to find the serial killers. You're going to find all of those people in any cross-section of society. But for the most part of society, the majority of people are good people, and they understand and they know we've moved past this. And for the young generation to now and come and play their faked activism, which is all completely and utterly fake, to say that, don't look at me, I'm white, I'm part of all of this. I'm part of this supposed white privilege, but don't look at me because I'm the white guy that's pointing out somebody else's white privilege. But you're also white. Oh, no, but I'm pointing his white privilege out, but you also have white privilege. Why don't you give up your life? Why don't you give up your college degree, and why don't you give it to a black person instead? Why don't you give up your car and give it to a black person? Why don't you give up your home and give it to a black person instead? They never call out their own white privilege. They always call out their next door neighbor's white privilege. It's an unbelievably growing contagion in this young society today, that it's everybody else's fault and they're consistently the victims.
Out of that is to stop being like that. And the way you stop being like that is by ceasing to tell yourself lies that you don't believe in and that you know you shouldn't act out. And, you know, and that's made a huge difference in my life, for better or for worse. I mean, it was very uncanny experience, I would say, because it's very discombobulating to experience yourself as fragmented enough so that much of what you do and say is actually false. It's a lot of work to clean that up. A lot.
Wow, you don't actually understand.
But the consequences are, in principle, worthwhile.
Small experiment for you, and it's an experiment that I've had, talking about a lot of work to clean that up, and I had to go through a lot of work. I went through workshops, incredible human being called Roy Banai. He's a Jewish man. I went through a very hard workshop with this man who never took it easy. He pointed out so many things in my life that was completely hypocritical. That how I put myself on a pedestal as this like strong man, this person that I'm not a sheep. He looked at me literally in my eyes, and the very first day he met me, and he says, "Are you a sheep or are you a lion?" And I said, "No, I'm 100% a lion." He says, "Yeah, you're a sheep." Like he just knew, like straight off the bat, he knew, and just what I went through in my life, just doing through those workshops, which completely changed my life. Completely, this human being completely changed my life. But that's just a side note. If I had to give you any experiment and do this, like this is something that it's going to be something that's going to absolutely shock you, and I promise you it's going to shock you. The worst thing you've ever done, that you're so embarrassed about that you just wouldn't tell anybody, right? If you are brave enough, if you're brave enough to do this, right? Go anywhere, just go to a shopping mall, go anywhere, right? And just pick out any random person. And from a vulnerability state, vulnerability is such a powerful thing. I've said this so many times about vulnerability. It's such a powerful human characteristic that a lot of people tend to think that it's a source of weakness, but it's not. If you had to go to somebody and say, a random person on the street or a random person in a shopping center, and I promise you, you'd be shuddering before you even do this, go to them and say the worst thing you've ever done. So I'm sorry, just give me 1 minute of your time. I just need to get something off my chest. I have to get off my chest to someone. I know you're a complete stranger, and I'm sure this means absolutely nothing to you, but this is what I did. This is what I once did. And just tell them the story. And you think, it's amazing what happens when you appeal to somebody else's humanity, and how, for the most part, you always get that humanity back, because nobody on this earth is in a position where they've never gone through something like that, where they're not in a state where they've ever been embarrassed like that. And the craziest thing is you don't get judgment back from a stranger. You actually get words of encouragement. It's an unbelievable experiment, and I promise you, I don't know if anybody will do it, but do it, because I have done it. And from a vulnerability space, just tell the person, like, this is the worst thing I've ever done, and it will shock you. It'll shock you what the response is. You will either find people that will relate to it and be like, yeah. You'll find people that will just open up and be like, well, this is what I did. It's almost like it opens up a little gap in their life to maybe for them to get something out, to tell you. That vulnerability space is so powerful. And I've said it so many times with regards to how we act as people in terms of trying to act as these strong men. But when you come aggressively to somebody, human nature is to swing out of corners. So if you come aggressively to somebody when they're in a corner, the only thing they're going to do is they're going to swing out of that corner. But when you come vulnerably to somebody when you've made a mistake, or even in a relationship and you vulnerably come to them and say, drop your rightness and be like, okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I apologize. It's amazing the response you get back, because it's just a human emotion that people can connect with. It's something that actually drives you closer. And I've always used this analogy before. I've used this analogy so many times. And I'm like, for the most part, the majority of human beings, decent human beings, if I had to give you a beautiful, beautiful butterfly, and I had to put that beautiful butterfly on your hand, and I had to say, crush it. I want you to crush this beautiful wings spread out. Put it in your hand, and I say, crush it. I want you to take that butterfly, and I want you to crush it in front of me. I want to see it. Come on, don't be a pussy, be strong. Crush it. The majority of people would be like, no, why? 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 What did it do to you? That butterfly is not strong. It's got no strength in it. It's so fragile and so brittle. But there's power in that. And that is, there's power in truth. There's power in what there is. There's power in what you are. Build on that. That builds strength. Vulnerability to understand that you are a flawed human being is strength. Vulnerability to understand that when you do something wrong, consequences come from that. That is your fault, not somebody else's. That's all vulnerability. That's all having to take that dead wood that Jordan Peterson's talking about and having to burn it. You have to burn that part of you, and that makes you stronger. Awareness and introspection into who you are takes vulnerability and takes a hell of a lot of pain, but it strengthens you because you are able to do that. No one can knock you down. No one can knock you down. It's never nobody else's fault. It's always your own. It's always you will always be able. You'll have that mechanic to always say, I can handle this. This is my life. I control this. It's not my father's life. It's not my father's fault that I'm where I am in my 20s. It's not my mother's fault that where I am in my 20s. They had their own pain. They had their own strife that they were unable to work through. It is not their fault. It is mine. Stop looking for someone to blame because you think that there is power in that and there isn't. Vulnerability comes. Power comes with power and strength comes from the realization and of the fact that you're not a perfect human being, that you are a flawed human being, but you are perfect for who you are right now, but you can always be better. And like he said, surpass that. And you need to be vulnerable to understand that. Vulnerable with yourself, vulnerable with the people's closest to you. And these things are feedback. When people gives you feedback, it's just as an example. I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot. I'm kind of hijacking this, but whenever I hear things like this, it always gets me going. And whenever somebody gives you feedback, also another lesson I learned in my life is when somebody gives you feedback, right? It's feedback. Take it as feedback. People just take offense to everything people say as if it's a personal attack on them or a personal attack on their ideologies, on their way of thinking. It's feedback. When people aren't happy and people come to you and say, what you're doing is wrong, it's feedback. They're not racist for it. They're not transphobic for it. They're not this for it. They're not that for it. They're giving you feedback. Take the feedback for what it is and either use it or don't use it. But if you're taking that feedback and immediately taking offense to it, to the point that other people need to be shunned, labeled, and put aside, they are not the problem. You are. If you can't take feedback, they are not the problem. You are the problem. You're operating from a space of like just all these grunges that are sitting in your head. You're operating from a space where you're carrying so much luggage and pain. that you're not willing to drop your rightness, you're not willing to drop your ego, to put your pride in your pocket for a second. When someone's giving you feedback, take feedback for what it is, whether you agree with it or you don't agree with it. You can take it, you can discard it, you can use some of it, you can use none of it. But if mere words that come out of another human being's mouth is enough to break you to pieces, then you're not strong. You are not aware of who you are. You are not aware of your flaws. Strength comes from that kind of battering.
Consequences are, in principle, worthwhile. And so that was part of what drove me towards clinical psychology, saying away from political science and law and from politics in general, because I started to believe that, and I think this is the great Western idea, the proper route forward for the redemption of the individual and for mankind as a whole is as a consequence of the redemption of each individual. And I truly believe that. And I believe that that occurs as a consequence of adherence to the truth and courage in the face of being. That's rule one, right? To stand up straight with your shoulders back, is to take on the onslaught and to enter the contentious ring and to do more than.
A quick short example on that. My father was someone that always ducked and dived people. He made lots of mistakes in his business life where, you know, he would do things wrong. He would take people's deposits and then he would disappear because he had spent the deposits and things like that. And he would duck and dive people. He could never ever hear the truth. My father was unable to hear the truth. My father was the kind of person that would go to a psychologist or forced into like a psychologist's office, and the moment he hears something that he doesn't like, he would just flip out and leave. My father could never handle the truth, to the point that even his clients, when he knew that he was, you know, things were delayed and, you know, he had spent the money and he hadn't delivered on what he was supposed to deliver, he would not answer the phone. He would not answer the phone, or he'd ask one of us to say, oh no, ask them and just tell them this. And like, that's someone who can't handle the truth. That's somebody who is unable, and his entire life has been a mess because of that. I learned that lesson, and this very day, I cannot pick up a phone where I know, okay, I fucked up somewhere, where I don't answer the phone. It bothers me. It actually bothers me to the extent that I'd rather pick up the phone, get, like he says, the onslaught, right? And just put my head down and take it. And I'm sorry, I'll sort it out. I apologize, I'm sorting it out. And they just nail you, and they nail you, and they nail you, and they nail you. But eventually, when they're done getting all of it out, it comes to a point where it's like, okay, this guy he didn't run away from me. He acknowledged he was wrong. He took accountability. As much as I'm angry, all I can do now is be like, okay, please just sort this out. And you realize, you see how human beings, all of a sudden, they go from that space where they're completely irate, all the way down to, okay, please sort it out. Because you didn't run. You stood there with your shoulders up and you took on the onslaught. You actually were able to handle the truth. You were able to introspect and say that you were wrong, and say, I take accountability for my actions. And you were able to offer some sort of solution because you were aware of all of these things.
Take on the onslaught and to enter the contentious ring and to do and to do more than your best, because your best isn't enough, because your best isn't as good as you could be. You have to push yourself past that. And that's, as far as I can tell, where you find what you need in life. You find the meaning that sustains you in life, and you find the patterns of action that redeem the world, both at the same time. I mean, life is a very difficult business. You know, it's fatal, and it's full of suffering, and it's full of betrayal and malevolence. There's nothing about it that's trivial. It's all profound. And in order to
100%.
find your way through all of that capacity for hellish experience, let's say, you need to develop a relationship with something that's profound. And you can. You have that capacity. And what could be more profound than the truth? And what would you rather have on your side? And you might say, well, that's obvious, and of course everyone should do that. And then you need to know why you don't. And the answer is, well,
when you're telling the truth, there's never ever anything to remember. That's one thing I've also noticed. When you're telling the truth, there's nothing to remember. When you're lying to everybody, you always have to remember, what did I say to this guy? What did I say to that guy? And you just get caught up in this web of lies when they just know that you're lying, and then lying about lying, and then lying about lying about lying. So the most liberating thing about the truth is you feel light. You remove that log from your chest, and there's never anything to remember, because everything you ever said was honest. You'll never have to go back into those archived files of lies to try and see how you justify the next one. The truth is just the truth, and it stands as the truth, and it will always be the truth. And anything that you get called out for, you're like, yeah, I said that. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I did say that. That's the truth. There's never anything to remember.
The burns are still healing. It's like, well, you know, there's no shortage of deadwood to burn off. And there's no shortage of pain when the deadwood burns off. And that's what makes people afraid of the truth. And so, what's the decision that you make? You know, you decide to believe. You know, it's a risk, an existential risk. It's an act of faith. You believe that the truth can set you free. You believe that people have an intrinsic divinity about their soul. You decide that you're going to live in that manner, and that you're going to let everything about yourself that isn't worthy of that goal die. And that might be almost everything that you are. And that's a terrible thing to contemplate.
It's very, very hard to handle that. And to this day, there'll always be elements of that in your life, where you're gonna have to consistently keep burning on that, keep burning at that. That day that when I got conscious, the realization that my entire life was just this fake bullshit web of lies was very painful, because I had built a persona, I had built a fake identity around who I was, but it wasn't who I was. I had suppressed who I was because my identity, or how I need to be perceived to others, far superseded who I really was. Other people needed to see me in a certain way, so I had to act and play a certain way. And in order to act and play a certain way, I had to lie consistently. And that day, that hour, that minute, that you realize that all of this, your entire life, all of these years, had just been one big lie. Everything just comes tumbling down like a house of cards, and then you tend to think to yourself, but then what am I? If everything I am is a lie, what is my worthiness? But the crazy thing is, like he says, is that your soul and who you are has got a definitive purpose on this earth. And starting from that again, where you let that house of cards fall and say, that is deadwood that is now burnt, and that might be all of you. It's super liberating, starting from the beginning the right way. And don't think that you're not going to be able, or you're not going to need to burn more wood. Because life continues after that. After that awareness, after that, that conscious introspection, that sort of like breakthrough. Yes, you feel great for a couple of weeks, but then life continues. And bad habits start coming in again, and things like that. But that breakthrough at least gives you the mechanic to deal with your life. Because life is like a glass of water, and there's a drop filling that glass every single time. And every time something happens in your life, and every time there's pain, and every time there's strife, and every time you've got to go through some sort of diversity, that glass keeps filling, that drop keeps filling, it keeps filling. And it's not a lot at one time, but it's a lot over a period of time. And eventually that glass gets full and it starts overflowing. But the mechanic, the conscious awareness is, I can turn that glass around and start again. That's the conscious awareness. Is yes, it's full. I'm up to here. I can hardly breathe. I've got a log in my chest. But you can turn that glass around and start again. It doesn't mean that the glass won't fill up again. But the mechanic is, yes, this is what I'm going through in my life, but also I can change this. Also, it's not everybody else's fault, it's mine. Also, it's a very liberating thing when you know that you can control everything in your own life. That means you can turn that glass over and start again. And you're like, again, you might need to burn off dead wood, and you're going to need to burn off dead wood all the way until the day you die. But at least you know what to burn.
The only thing that's worse, I would say, is the alternative. Because the alternative is the sorts of hells that we managed to produce around us, and that we produced with particular expertise during the totalitarian regimes of the 20th century. And it would be a good thing if we decided collectively and individually not to go back there again.
And that is such an important statement that he's making over there. It's such an important statement because you don't realize how easy it is for society to go back to those hellish days. You don't realize how easy it is, because the road to hell is paved with good intentions. It's paved with good intentions. And what happens is people tend to justify. This is what happens when you don't tell yourself the truth. People justify the lies. And then how they justify the lies is that I'm doing this for the betterment of myself. Because that's how you're going to justify a lie. I'm doing this because that's who I really am. I'm doing this because it's better for society. I'm doing this because... If you don't take responsibility and hold on to that truth and live by that, it is so easy for society to slip back to an age where you will justify the extermination of millions of people, and you'll say that that's the right thing. We did this for our society. We did it for a better world. It's so easy. It's such a slippery slope when individuals start ignoring the truth, start dabbling in delusion, and then justifying that. Justifying it and saying, this is for the better good. Because those are the people, those are the societies that produce the Hitlers.
Thank you.
This man is an incredible human being. He's absolutely an incredible human being. You don't have to agree with him. You don't have to agree with him. But to hate him for what he's doing, for how much he's changed people's lives, for the honesty, that can only come from weak people. Anyway, I love you all, man. I apologize if this was long. It's a very long video. I apologize about that. But things like this always get me going. Anyway, you guys let me know what you think down below, and I'll catch you in the next one.